Alex Mercer stared at the humming closed sign on the glass door of Marty's Corner Market for the third time that morning. The neon sign sputtered, as if it was trying to keep a secret that it couldn't maintain any longer. He took a deep breath, drew in the stagnant, coffee-scented air that had become his custom, and let the world's weight settle on his shoulders for a bit longer before he pushed the door open. He'd worked 42 weeks at Marty's, each shift a rotation of stock-taking, bag-jing, and the occasional, "Do you need a receipt?" that felt more like a polite inquiry than a courtesy. $22 an hour was barely enough to pay the rent on his modest two-bedroom apartment, the utilities, and his tradition of buying a single-serve latte on the days when his paycheck hinted at a little extra. The town of Willow Creek, a tiny, two-street town where everybody knew everybody else's middle name, had become his comfort and his jail. The clock above the register said 7:05 a.m. And as Alex checked out the last morning customer, a boy with headphones and a half-finished sheet of homework, he looked at the map pinned above his desk. It was a large, glossy photo of the Harbor City skyline, the city 3 hours away by train. The image was frayed at the edges, the glossy surface scratched by hundreds of thumbprints. It was both a challenge and a promise in his head. Alex was sitting at his kitchen table the day he decided to leave, with a stack of unpaid bills before him like a wobbly skyscraper. He had locked up shop an hour earlier, the cash register ringing shut behind him, and the voice of his manager still resonating in his head, talking about next month's inventory. He stared at his banking application, the balance a lone digit, $79, sipping his budget coffee, the bitterness crawling up his esophagus. Then his phone buzzed. A message from his old college roommate, Jace. "Ever think of getting out? I'm in Harbor City's got a soft spot for those who work hard. You should see it." It wasn't just a suggestion, it was an invitation. Alex stared at the blinking cursor for a long time before typing, "Maybe. I'll think about it." The thought seemed both absurd and inevitable. He'd always imagined himself as someone who would never leave the back office of a store. The world beyond Willow Creek felt like a story he observed from the sidelines. Yet, the rhythm of each day, wake, work, eat, sleep, felt more like a lullaby than a life. He closed his laptop, turned off the light, and slipped under the threadbare blanket that had been his only comfort for months. The darkness was almost tangible, but his mind spun with potential, and for the first time in years, he felt a peculiar spark of hope. 2 weeks later, Alex stood on the busy platform of Harbor City's Central Station. The air reeked of espresso, car exhaust, and the subtle hint of 1,000 strangers' perfume. He clutched a battered duffel bag, the scuffed corners a testament to days of travel and tight train backs. He felt his own heartbeat thudding under his ribs like a drum, each beat echoing with the rushing throng about him. He'd scored a small, but honest, gig at a modest 24-hour cafe called Midnight Brew, in a converted warehouse in the Arts District. The pay was slightly better than Marty's, the tips were unpredictable but occasionally bountiful, and best of all, the city pulsed with a rhythm that was both stifling and thrilling. The first night, Alex wiped down tables while a low-profile indie band played on a corner stage area. He pondered the skyscraper glass walls he would be looking at from his bedroom window in Willow Creek and experienced a twinge of homesickness. Still, he considered, perhaps this was the kind of yearning that gave life meaning. It was on his third shift, after the midnight rush had slowed to a handful of regulars, that he spotted her for the first time. She was perched on a high stool at the far end of the bar, a half-full sketchbook balanced on her knees, a charcoal pencil sketching frenetically across the page. Her hair was a wild fall of dark curls that tumbled across the left side of her face, and her eyes, one bright green, the other a stormy hazel, darted back and forth between the paper and the crowd, measuring everything with an intensity that Alex couldn't ignore. She appeared in a worn leather jacket, the color a deep mahogany, with ripped black jeans and a pair of scuffed Doc Martens. She did not order a drink but placed a small half-eaten croissant on the table and nodded to Alex with a faint smile. "Hey, would you order me a coffee?" "Black, no sugar," she said, her voice a gentle, melodic whisper amidst the ticking of the wall clock. Alex nodded in response, noticing the mark on his left thumb, a little, faded scar that appeared too familiar. She watched as he poured the scalding coffee, steam curling up in a ghostly crescent. When he set down the cup, she let out a brief, startled laugh that sounded like wind shuffling through leaves. "Thank you," she said, taking the cup with a faint shake of her hand. Her fingers bore a simple silver ring, a plain band, but one that caught the light in a way that made Alex's chest tighten. She lifted the cup, sipped, and then turned her attention back to Alex. "You're new here, aren't you? I haven't seen you." Her voice was playful, friendly. "Yeah," Alex replied, his voice a little hoarse from the excitement. "Just moved to the city a few weeks ago. I'm Alex." He extended a hand, and for a fleeting moment, their fingers brushed. She smiled, the smile that once again stole his breath. "Mara. Nice to meet you, Alex." That brief encounter set a tone that followed Alex for weeks. Mara would appear in the evenings, sometimes alone but most often with a troupe of fellow artists, always bearing that sketchbook that contained what felt like a universe of ideas and emotions. When she wasn't at the cafe, Alex would see her in the graffiti-tagged alleys, in the dim lights of the underground clubs, and in the hidden parks of the city where she'd sit in the swing set, legs pumping, lost in thought. Mara was magnetic, her presence seemed to bend the air around her. Alex found himself lingering after his shifts, just to catch a glimpse of her, to hear the soft rustle of her sketchbook pages. He discovered that Mara was a freelance illustrator, a visual storyteller according to her LinkedIn page, doing album covers and comic panels for indie bands. She talked about her love for colors, how one shade could convey something no words ever could. In the first month, Alex felt as if the city had reshaped itself around his new love. He was taking midnight walks, using the city's neon lights as a backlight for his brain. He began to sketch himself, though amateurishly, on napkins, inspired by Mara's flowing curves. He was falling, hard and defenseless, into a love that seemed to belong in an independent romance movie. It was under the awning of a second-hand bookstore on a rainy Saturday afternoon that the initial crack appeared. Alex had offered Mara his umbrella, and they'd had a brief, snug conversation about the smell of old paper and the virtues of coffee over tea. Inside, Mara's expression altered, her eyebrows contracted, a strained flutter of her hands. "I've been wanting to tell you something," she whispered, her voice barely more than a whisper over the soft jazz that hummed in the background. I'm not always. I mean, I have bipolar disorder." The words fell like a stone into a pool, sending ripples through Alex's heart. He felt a strange sense of recognition, that invisible hand of fate that had so casually hurled them together, and a surge of protectiveness. He had never gone out with anyone who had a mental health diagnosis. His experience was limited to caring for a mother with dementia and a partner who had struggled with the odd panic attack. The term bipolar conjured up a montage of images from the media, highs so high they danced along the edges of insanity and lows that sucked a person into the darkness. Alex looked at Mara, really looked, as though he were beholding her for the first time. She was the same woman who had a charcoal pencil spinning over her sketchbook, yet now there was an added layer, a surface tension that seemed both fragile and powerful. "Thank you for telling me," he said, his voice low, wary. "I'm glad you felt you could trust me enough to tell me. I don't know all about it, but I need to learn." Mara's eyes welled up slightly, fear and relief swirling together in a ballet across them. Mara's eyes welled up slightly, fear and relief swirling together in a ballet across them. "I was scared of frightening you away," she admitted, her voice breaking like delicate glass. "I've had incidents when I'm not myself. I'm scared you'll think I'm damaged, or that I'll be a burden." Alex reached out, his hand brushing her cheek, as if to reassure himself that she was real and present, not a caricature from a textbook. "You're not a burden," he whispered. "You're a person. And I'm willing to learn." That night, the city's lights glittered like a promise. Alex walked home with his mind replaying the conversation. He felt a strange surge of protectiveness, as if his new love was a new uncharted land. He mashed his thumb into his forehead, taking his pulse, feeling his own anxiety build. He thought about the promise he had made to himself when he left Willow Creek, to find something more than a paycheck, something that made his heart race. He had found it, and it was complex, but he was not going to run back to the safety net of a minimum wage salary. Those first few weeks after that confession were a roller coaster of ups and downs. On some days Mara was a shooting star, her laughter lighting up the small coffee shop with a brilliance that rendered the dull hum of the espresso machine into an orchestra. She'd take Alex's hand, pull him onto the rooftop of the rear alley of the cafe, and they'd sit and see fireworks of neon cans of paint burst in the air as they talked about their future possibilities. Other days, the clouds closed in and Mara retreated within herself. Alex did not always know what to do. He'd watch her stare out the window, her eyes glazing as she inscribed odd sentences on napkins. He'd see her fingertips tremble as she lifted a spoon to her mouth to stir tea. He realized, slowly, that bipolar was not a moment but a spectrum of experience. Manic times with energy that was both exhilarating and exhausting, depressive times when the world had lost its color and her sketchbook was closed. One evening, following a particularly energetic performance at an underground experimental theater, Mara burst in through the cafe's back door, her face shining with excitement. She slammed her sketchbook down on the counter, eyes sparkling. "I've just finished a new series. Look, Alex, these are cover designs for a new indie rock band. I'm so pumped up right now, I'm about to jump out of my skin." She was a storm of energy, barely pausing for breath. Alex laughed, the sound bubbling up from a place he'd not felt in years. He helped her arrange the drawings, his hands moving with a delicate, steady rhythm. "They're amazing," he said, trying to capture the intensity of her joy without smothering it. "You're so talented." Mara's smile was a flash of pure light, a moment that could freeze time. She leaned in close, her breath tickling his ear, and whispered, "I love that you see me, even when I'm falling apart." Alex went home that evening to his tiny studio apartment, a bare room above a laundromat that always smelled faintly of soap and old coffee, and wrote down his thoughts. He was aware that loving her on the threshold of depression and mania was not about rescuing her but offering a haven, a mooring that would hold her fast when the waves ran high. He recalled the sketchbook she'd always carried with her, how she turned to it when words failed. He made up his mind that he would be her someone who would lend an ear when the world became too loud, who would be quiet when she needed space, and who would offer a warm hand when she fell. The next morning, Alex arrived at midnight brew early, his mind already mapping out a plan. He bought a small, inexpensive plant, a tough succulent that could survive neglect and still thrive with little attention. He wrapped it, placed it on the counter, and left a note. "For when the world gets too much, let this be a reminder you're still growing." He slid it on to her usual place. Mara found the plant that afternoon, her eyes scanning briefly over the note, then warming. "Thanks, Alex," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. It's perfect." Their relationship from that point on was a careful dance. Alex formed a habit of learning more about bipolar disorder, devouring articles, documentaries, and podcasts. He discovered that manic phases could trigger creativity bursts, speeding up thoughts and making ordinary tasks irrelevant, and that depressive phases could slow everything to a halt, where even breathing was an effort. He knew that establishing routines, encouraging normal sleep patterns, and quietly reminding Mara to take her medication were acts of love, not of control. Mara, on the other hand, loved Alex's stability. She opened her world to him, her sketchbooks, her art shows, her midnight jam sessions, while also allowing him to see the storm that sometimes raged inside her. She taught him to look for color in the gray, to find beauty in the cracked sidewalks and the bruised clouds. Their love was not the romantic ideal Hollywood sold, but an actual, imperfect, honest relationship. But it did not always come so easily. On one fall night, after a particularly lucrative freelance project, Mara's manic energy got out of control. She called Alex in a panic, her voice trembling. "I cannot breathe, Alex. I have to create, I have to be alive." She had thrown paint on the walls of her studio, spilled coffee on the ground, and was inhaling fumes from the fresh cans like a child addicted to fireworks. Alex entered to find a room that looked like the aftermath of a storm, bright oil colors splattered onto canvases, a broken lamp casting light on puddles of liquid color. He took a deep breath, remembering all he'd read. In manic episodes, the individual often feels invincible, driven by an unrelenting surge of ideas and a decreased need for sleep. He stepped over a puddle, his shoes soaking in the mixture, and knelt beside her. "Mara," he said softly, "let's sit. You're safe here. Let's put the paint down together." She looked at him with a haze of excitement and exhaustion, a pleading expression on her face. He helped her clean up the mess, attempting not to squash her creative flow but to channel it into something manageable. He had gone online and printed out a color list and suggested they create a series of small canvases instead of spray painting the whole room. Together, they painted, simultaneously, the brushstrokes in sync, for the next hour.